Now, this is quite a story from NASA because for the second time in history, a man-made object has left our solar system. NASA is saying the Voyager 2 probe is now in a space between the stars.
There are moments in human history when everything shifts, when a silence is broken not by sound, but by something far deeper, a signal, a gesture, a turn. And this time, it came from the farthest reaches of our cosmic reach. Not from Earth, but from something we sent into the dark over 4 decades ago. Voyager 2, humanity's second messenger to the stars, has just done something no one expected. It turned back. And in that simple act, that slow, deliberate deviation, it whispered something into the void, something we weren't ready to hear. In 1977, Voyager 2 was launched into the unknown. Not with fanfare, not with weapons or warnings, but with music, with greetings, with a golden record filled with the sounds of Earth, waves crashing, children laughing, languages from every corner of our world saying hello to the stars. It was our way of saying, we are here, we exist, and we wonder. For more than 40 years, it has drifted, past the planets, beyond the frozen orbits of Neptune and Uranus, through the edge of our solar system's breath. It crossed the Heliopause where the sun's influence fades into interstellar night. And for a while it was just quiet, peaceful. The data it sent home was beautiful, yes, but expected. Until now. In early 2025, something shifted. At first it was subtle, a ripple in the background, a tremble in the cosmic winds. The readings Voyager 2 sent back weren't just strange, they were impossible. The instruments recorded spikes in radiation, magnetic field twists that bent the rules of physics, signals that pulsed like a heart. And then came the moment no one could explain. Voyager 2 turned, not drifted, not spun randomly through mechanical fatigue, turned, slowly, purposefully, like something had reached out and touched it, like it was startled, like it was told to stop. Back on Earth, scientists stared at their monitors in silence. At first, they didn't believe it. Maybe it was noise. Maybe an error in the ancient systems still somehow humming after all these years. But no, the probe's thrusters hadn't fired. Its navigation wasn't faulty, and yet its direction had changed. Something out there had altered its path. What followed was data that left even the most seasoned astrophysicists sitting in stunned silence. Voyager 2 was picking up a pattern, a pulse. It wasn't the random static of deep space, nor the echo of a dying star. It was consistent, precise, a rhythm, every 61.2 seconds, rising and falling like breath. When converted to sound, it didn't resemble anything known. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't natural. It was something else. A low, resonating hum that seemed to vibrate not just in the ears but in the chest, deep and haunting. And worst of all, it didn't stop. Scientists ran models, cross-checked with ground-based observatories, compared with every known celestial source. Nothing matched. And then, the only explanation left was the one no one wanted to say aloud. This wasn't a cosmic accident. This was a signal, a response, not to Voyager's message, but to its presence. Voyager had crossed something, not just the border of the solar system, but a threshold, a boundary that wasn't supposed to be there, or maybe wasn't supposed to be found. The space beyond our sun should be empty, filled with drifting gas, scattered particles, and the occasional comet wandering aimlessly. But the region Voyager had reached was eerily clean, too clean, as if something had swept it bare, removed the noise, erased the dust, carved out a sterile silence where only this rhythmic signal remained. The idea horrified the teams monitoring the data, not because it confirmed alien life, but because it didn't. It was something stranger, something older, something that didn't announce itself but left its presence imprinted in the very laws of space around it. A distortion not just in magnetism or radiation, but in reality itself. And Voyager 2 had brushed against it, like a moth touching the edge of a flame it didn't understand. The turn then wasn't just movement, it was meaning. Something had noticed. Something had seen our tiny ancient probe drifting closer. And instead of silence, it gave us an answer. Not in words, but in action. Voyager's cameras were long deactivated to save power. So we have no image of what it turned from. No snapshot of what looms at the edge of everything we know. Just the data. Just the pulse. Just the feeling in the air. The realization that we may not be as alone as we always thought. Or worse, that we were never alone and simply not worth noticing. Until now. What Voyager 2 turned away from may be the most important discovery in human history. And yet it has no name, no face, just a whisper in the void, repeating every 61 seconds. And here on Earth, we're left with the question that chills to the bone. What did we just disturb? The rooms at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory have always held the quiet hum of machinery and the steady tapping of keyboards. But after Voyager 2 turned, that silence changed. It wasn't technical anymore. It was emotional. A deep, unsettled quiet where engineers and astrophysicists sat shoulder to shoulder, staring at screens, hearts pounding beneath lab coats. Not one of them could shake the feeling that something ancient had just turned its gaze toward Earth. The probe had sent more than data. It had sent a reaction. The instruments, delicate and battered by time, registered what could only be described as an invisible wall. Not a physical structure, but a magnetic one. A field so precise in its distortion, so consistent in its behavior, it defied the randomness of space. For decades, the boundaries of our solar system were thought to be blurry, soft zones of transition between the known and the unknown. But what Voyager had touched wasn't soft, it was sharp, it was deliberate, it was real, and now it had changed everything. At first, the scientific community tried to stay grounded. They double-checked sensors, reviewed protocols, and considered everything from cosmic dust to rogue energy fields. But none of it explained the regularity, the rhythm, the clear and repeating distortion in the magnetic measurements. The data didn't just scream for attention. It demanded a new language. Something intelligent had pressed its fingerprint against the edge of space, and Voyager had drifted too close. Some wanted to believe it was coincidence, just a moment of cosmic turbulence in the vast, chaotic sea of stars. But others, the ones who had stared longest into the void, felt something deeper. This wasn't just turbulence. It was architecture, and architecture implies a builder. Within days of the first clear pulse, discussions began, not in public, not in press releases, but behind closed doors. The Pentagon was briefed. World governments were notified. For the first time in decades, military and scientific minds sat together in rooms filled with old coffee and sleepless eyes, trying to understand if what Voyager 2 had touched was a defense system, a warning, a wall, or a cage. What if, some dared to ask, this wasn't about keeping things out, but keeping something in? That thought hung in the air like smoke. Because if there truly was a boundary beyond the solar system, and if that boundary had responded to Voyager 2, then it meant one of two terrifying things. Either something out there had built it, and we had just poked it, or something in here was never meant to get out. And that's when the data shifted again. The radiation pulses began to modulate, tiny fluctuations in amplitude and wave shape, so precise they looked like code. Not speech, not language, but intent. Something was not just responding, it was adjusting. The pulses weren't static anymore. They were listening, adapting, waiting. Back on Earth, AI systems were fed the data. Supercomputers churned through every possible interpretation, every mathematical translation, every symbolic comparison to human languages, music, DNA. And slowly, a possibility began to emerge, one that chilled even the most skeptical minds. It wasn't just a boundary, it was a perimeter with a sensor network so advanced, so sensitive, that a probe the size of a washing machine brushing against it after 47 years was enough to trigger a reaction. And that reaction wasn't defensive, it was observational. Voyager 2 hadn't been attacked, it hadn't been pulled or destroyed, it had been noticed. And gently, It had been told to turn back. If this was a warning, it was a calm one. But warnings don't have to be loud to be deadly. The message was clear. Do not come closer. Do not approach again. The pulse continued, steady, relentless. And even as Voyager 2 drifted further from the magnetic anomaly, the signal remained in the background, not chasing, not aggressive, but present, watching. At the University of Cambridge, a small team of astrophysicists began comparing the new data with centuries-old theories. Whispers in the scientific community about the cosmic quarantine hypothesis. That perhaps the reason we hadn't heard from other civilizations was because we weren't allowed to. That maybe the universe wasn't quiet. It was simply restrained, not by chance, but by force. And suddenly Voyager 2, old, half-blind, barely breathing, had reached the fence. What startled everyone wasn't the idea of extraterrestrial life. That was always a hope buried beneath the stars. It was the idea that such life, or whatever this was, might not want us, might not be welcoming, might be watching not as a parent or a neighbor, but as a warden. What if we're not the explorers of the cosmos, but the inmates? There were no answers. Just more data, more sleepless nights, more whispered phone calls between space agencies in Russia, China, Europe. The realization was setting in. Humanity had grown just enough to touch the edge of something we didn't understand. And in doing so, we'd been seen. No one said it aloud in official meetings. But among friends in quiet moments, the question passed between lips like a ghost. Have we just awakened something? And worse, was it already awake? In the weeks that followed, the pulse never stopped. Every 61.2 seconds, like clockwork, it echoed through the dark, faint but unwavering. Voyager 2 continued on its new path, veering away from the invisible wall it had grazed, its instruments slowly adjusting to the decreasing interference. But back on Earth, the pulse had become something more than a signal. It had become a presence, a heartbeat in the background of human understanding. Every scientist listening to it knew, even if they couldn't say how, that it wasn't a fluke. It was the sound of being seen. The probe, now over 20 billion kilometers away, carries no cameras. It has no voice, no eyes, just old sensors and fading memory banks. And yet it has returned with the most profound message we've ever received. Not one etched in words, but carved into the very silence of space. There is something out there, something ancient, something aware. Governments remain quiet. No public announcement has been made. No official statements beyond vague mentions of anomalous data. But the people in the know, the ones who sit in dim control rooms late into the night, they feel it in their bones. This isn't just about Voyager anymore. This is about the veil lifting, even just slightly, on a truth we've long suspected and deeply feared. We are not the top of the ladder. We never were. And perhaps we've been permitted to believe we were, until now. Across observatories and labs, the brightest minds have tried to decode the signal further. AI-assisted analysis reveals microvariations, embedded harmonics, strange layering in the waveforms that don't behave like natural phenomena. Some believe it could be a message, one so layered, so alien in construction, that it may never be translated. Others aren't so sure. Maybe it's not meant to be read. Maybe it's just a marker, a flare, a signal to whoever or whatever I place that boundary. They've reached the edge. Speculation has grown darker. If there is a perimeter, it must have purpose. Not simply to monitor, but to limit, to contain. What if the solar system has been isolated, not to protect us from the galaxy, but to shield the galaxy from us? Or worse, to lock something inside that even we haven't discovered yet? The area Voyager 2 approached was unnaturally clean. No dust, no background radiation, no sign of the usual messiness of space. It's as if the region had been sterilized, cleared, prepared. And the idea that gnaws at the minds of those studying it is this. What if that space wasn't just cleaned, but erased? Not an accident of astrophysics, a decision, a boundary drawn long before our species even learned to walk upright. A fence around a zoo, a warning around a quarantine, a scar left by something we can't even imagine. But perhaps the most haunting part of it all is that Voyager 2, despite all this, continues onward. It hasn't been stopped. It hasn't been pulled into silence. It drifts, as it always has, lonely, slow, unblinking. And that's what scares them the most. Because if this perimeter was meant to contain or warn, why let the probe live? Why let it leave? Why let us know? Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a test. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first move in a conversation we're not equipped to have. In conference calls between physicists and astronomers, words like non-hostile, observational, and containment get thrown around. But none of those words make the nights less heavy, because underneath the analysis, the charts, the waveforms, and the endless data logs, there's something primal, something you don't need a PhD to feel. Dread, not the kind that screams or runs, the kind that sits, quiet, watchful. The feeling of walking through a forest and realizing the silence means you're not alone. And now, with this pulse repeating in the deep, with Voyager's shift echoing across the skies, that feeling has found its way into the hearts of everyone who understands what it means. The stars have not changed. They shine as they always have. Distant, beautiful, cold. But we see them differently now. We see them knowing something beyond them has blinked. Not randomly, not aimlessly, but because we got too close. Voyager 2 is still moving, still sending whispers home. But every whisper now carries weight it never held before. Every packet of data isn't just information, it's a breath held, a message traced with shaking hands. We watch the signal, we analyze the pulse, but deep down we all know what happened. We knocked on the door, and something knocked back. So now we wait, for another signal, for silence, for anything. But one truth can no longer be denied. The edge of the solar system was never empty. It was never just a place where our influence ends. It was the beginning of someone else's, and now they know we're here.